Good morning, folks. It's just 10, so I'll give folks maybe one more minute, see if anyone else joins. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to our December CEDEN user group meeting. Got a couple items on the agenda today. Are some updates to the vocab request template and business rules, some matrix update discussion to continue, and then an update on CEDEN 2.0. So just a reminder for anyone who isn't familiar with all of us, I'm Tessa Fojit, the CEDEN database manager, and I have several of my staff online here. Our vocabulary management team includes Jennifer Salisbury and Candace Hines and myself. So many of you have probably emailed with us on your vocabulary requests. And then we also have our CEDEN 2.0 lead staff, Keenan Smith, online. And as always, our group, the best way to reach us is the CEDEN at Waterboard's email address. Okay, so from there, I'm gonna get into our first agenda item, which is some updates to vocabulary business rules, and these will get added to the vocabulary request template for so that they're there as a reference for everyone. This one is one that recently came up. So we already have a business rule for microbial source tracking PCR analytes and how those should be formatted as an analyte and description. And then recently we had a request for a PCR assay that was not for microbial source tracking. It's actually taking sample directly from the organism. And so we just needed to tweak how we write up that description. So we will add this. So this is for species specific. So when you're either actually testing the organism itself or something from the organism itself, rather than taking a water sample, which is what most microbial source tracking does, is you collect a water sample and look for something from an organism. This is like you're looking for the organism itself. So it specifies the DNA source, which would either be mitochondrial, nuclear, or chloroplast, if it was plant. And then it could be an assay name, or it could also be a target gene. So like in this example that we had, the target gene was cytochrome B. And then in the description, this part is the same, where it's going to have the forward and reverse primer sequences. And you can also include a probe primer sequence if that's available, which it was in this case. So it makes that description long, but that helps people really know what assay was used and if it matches exactly to something else. So I don't know, no, most of you probably don't deal with these, but just something that came up new that we're going to add to our analyte list of business rules. Any questions on this? Okay.
There's a question in the chat, it looks like.
Someone
had a question in the chat. Yeah.
Great. Oh, clarify what PCR analyte is. Sure. Sorry about that. I'm using all my lingo. PCR is polymerase chain reaction. So it's a microbiology molecular technique for looking at usually it's, often it's looking at a bacterial community, but it doesn't have to be. So that's sort of what this is DNA. You're looking at the DNA from some organism or community. Hopefully that helps. Or if someone else wants to add more, go ahead, Cass.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. It's not related, somewhat related. I did sit in on the bioassessment workshop, and I know there was a lot of talk about eDNA, like sampling the water to see what organisms. And I was curious, what tables would that go in? Is that kind of what you're talking about right here too?
So a lot of so eDNA is actually a very big, broad umbrella term. eDNA would include PCR analysis, as well as metabarcoding analysis. So a lot of the eDNA things that people are talking about is metabarcoding, where you maybe collect a water sample and then you're looking at all the different species that have DNA in that sample. And so that type of analysis, we're actually planning to put in the taxonomy tables because it's doing the taxonomy of that community from that sample. Whereas PCR is we do in the chemistry table because it's just more like a chemistry analysis, and it gives you usually like a concentration of gene copies per milliliter. So this PCR analysis is DNA looking at like, yeah, a concentration, like gene copies of that particular assay or probe. And then metabarcoding is giving you a community composition. So we call that taxonomy. Now, we have not fully tested that out in the taxonomy tables. We're sort of working up to that of like, because the type of information you need to record for a metabarcoding eDNA analysis in taxonomy is pretty different than, collecting and think macro invertebrates and how they do that, microscopy analysis of identifying them. So that's kind of the details we're working out. But in theory, that is more taxonomy.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I just it seems somewhat related, but thanks for that distinction.
Yeah. It's something I've learned a lot about in the last few years because I knew nothing about any sort of eDNA stuff 5 years ago. So that's been my recent learning. Okay. So then next I know some folks have heard about this, but and this is probably most of us is like the regional data centers are dealing with most of this, but for method names and digest extract names, so again, this is more chemistry related, we're updating how we format names for standard methods and ASTM methods. So those are two of the big groups that create standardized methods. And so we're just changing the formatting of how we write the names and descriptions of those methods to be a little more specific and in line with ELAP accreditation certificates, as well as US EPA guidance. So right now, we have lots of those methods in our lookup lists in the database already. Right now, we're not going to go back and change all the existing methods to fit this new business rules. But when we transition to CEDEN 2.0, they will all be updated in there. So that is just something, labs and any other data providers may need to be aware of, that how you write the name may be different in CEDEN 2.0, but it will actually be referring to the same method. But any requests for adding new methods right now that we're getting of these, either from standard methods or ASTM, we are starting to use the new business rules. So basically for standard methods, it's always going to have a year that the method was updated as part of the name. And then that'll also be in the description, as well as having that edition number in the description. So these are just two examples of recent ones we added or updated. So a lot of our current ones don't have a year on them. We just have this, SM3111B. Some of them say an addition number, some of them say B23 or 22 or whatever. So this should be the new standard going forward. And then ASTM is similar. It should always have that year added on. So in this case, they only do 2 digits. And then some of them have a section number as well. And then some of them also have a year. So it's the year they were originally published and then a year they were reapproved. So not all of them will have that second year or that section, but if that applies, then it would be included in that name. So we will add these business rules to the vocab request template. So most of our business rules are for vocabulary are in the vocabulary request template, and there's a tab next to the methods that say method BRs for business rules, and we'll add these all to these lists. Okay, Tori, go ahead.
In regards to for the ASTM, it's great to have the original name, but every time you do the reapproved 2019, and then if it does it again, you'll be changing the actual code every time that people are using, so you'll be adjusting that net, if it adds another year reapproved in 2025, you'll change that method name to have the 25 in there too. So you'd be constantly changing the code, not just the description.
Yeah, I think we would actually add that as a new method. This one would stay, and then we would add a new one that had the 25 on it as well. Does that make sense?
So it'd be 9719 and then 25.
Well,
reapproved. I would think it would only change if it was a new method, right? Because when I think of C reapproved, I just think of it as actually the same, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
I think ASTM, I would have to refresh myself, but there's quite a bit of time in between 97 and 2019. So I don't think they're reapproving every year or two. I think it's they made a change or something that makes them want to document that, but I will double check. I haven't seen anywhere there's multiple reapproval dates.
Okay. Oh, yeah, because if it changes, then it would if it matched what we're doing for the other standard methods, wouldn't we just do the new year?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that you wouldn't keep adding all the reapproval dates, but
yeah,
I hadn't gone through the exercise, I guess, to actually see one that had multiple reapproval dates.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Jennifer.
Yeah. I was just going to say that Keenan, Margaret had a good question on the chat, and Keenan answered it in a good way. I don't know.
Okay, about the order of, so both a reapproval and a section. Yeah, so section goes first, then oh, okay, you're right. I have it written wrong, but well, I'll update that. Okay.
I think as long as you're
clarifying
thinking
questions.
As long as it's a new code, that makes it a lot easier. If we're adjusting old codes all the time, that makes it tough,
No, yeah. I don't. That was not the intention. Definitely not.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I appreciate all feedback because it's hard for me to think through every scenario. So thank you. Okay, any other questions on that? We'll make sure we get the guidance added correctly for the order here, because I see that it's not quite the right order for this one when we add it to the vocab request template. Okay, then I'll move on to our next one. So this next one, we are trying to just provide some guidance. It's mostly more recommendations or a starting point for people on what they should be, how they should be naming their program, parent project, and project. Currently, we don't really have any guidance or business rules on those. And obviously, they're very common things that get requested. So especially for brand new users who haven't submitted to CEDEN before, it can be just, a big question mark of what should I call these things. So we just wanted to provide, some kind of best practices or suggested starting points for these that we would also add to the templates for easy access. So I'm guessing if you're in this user group, you probably know some of this stuff, but I'm just going to go over it here. And honestly, I'm also looking if you have other suggestions of guidance we could add that would be helpful. But going from program to parent project to project, it should be more general to more detailed. And then each of these has a code, name, and description. And so it's the same where your code is going to be, it's shorter, so it's more general, and then it gets more detailed and longer as you go across. But the idea is they should all kind of contain the same information, and it's just you're writing it out longer and in more detail as you go from code to name to description. So for program, the only real requirement is if it fits under an existing program, then that should be used. We don't want to be creating lots of new programs if we already have existing programs that exist. And then the recommendations are that it should reference an actual existing program. It likely has a web page or some form of documentation that you could refer to. And often programs don't include a year because they're just meant to be more general and generic, and that, years could be designated at the parent or project level. And then for parent project, this is really a requirement that is looking forward to CEDEN 2.0, that the parent project code and name cannot be the same as the project code and name. They can't be exactly the same. They have to be something unique about them. So recommendations, also your parent project probably shouldn't be the same as your program, but for some really small ones that may make sense. So that's not a rule. It could have exceptions, but it's just a best practice. It should be more general than your project, and it does not need to include a year. Sometimes that may make sense, but typically not. And then project, again, that same requirement of the inverse, just that your project name cannot be the exact same as your parent project name. It could basically be the same, but then you add a year to your project code, something like that. And then this one, the recommendations are, if this is an ongoing effort, you want to just match your pattern of how you formatted it for the previous years. It's often good to include a reference to the watershed being monitored. It often starts with an agency name, of who's doing the monitoring. And then it's good to include a year, especially for ongoing projects. That's a really good way to distinguish, but it could be calendar year, water year, fiscal year. It depends on what makes sense for your project. So again, probably a lot of folks on here, you already know how you format your project, parent, and program, but we've just had noticed over our time that for brand new users, this could be helpful guidance. And I'm curious if y'all have comments or other ideas that would be helpful guidance for new people. Tori.
Everything that you said is kind of how I guide people as well, especially with the program being make sure to look out for props, because you want to match up with that's already in there. Anyways, most of that all lines up with what I say, but then it still is kind of confusing for some people. So I usually try and give them an example, I guide them right to the lookup lists. And then when they see the examples, things are like, oh, okay. So sometimes the examples in the lookup list really help people kind of solidify them. Just show them the ones that you tend to go for, because sometimes there can be variation. But I tend to show them examples. This is how another project does it. It kind of helps people. I don't know. Just putting that out there.
Definitely. Yeah, we do that too.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I see in the chat, Marco had a question about station. And so I think that he asked if your description should contain the code and name and then the description. And that's not really what I'm intending, but usually it's, the code is a shortened version, stations are different. I wasn't really talking about those. But yeah, like Nathan gave a nice example that it's just you're adding more detail and more language. It doesn't have to repeat that code in each one. It's just that you're expanding it as you go. Okay, and then Marco had some more feedback on the method, so we'll look into that. Part of that is we're trying to match this other guidance with US EPA and ELAP, so I'll have to look at that again and see what we can do. Okay, well, thank you all for listening. So basically all the things I just talked about, we will be adding to the vocabulary request template that we have on the CEDEN.org website. And when that gets posted, maybe next week, we will send out an email and let you all know that there's an updated version. Okay, now get on to the matrix updates. Oops, I was going to update this slide. All right, so first we'll talk about stormwater and then we'll talk about lab water. So we have been discussing stormwater as a potential matrix, or it's been an evolving discussion over the last two meetings that we've had. So in August, we had proposed updating the description of the effluent matrix to include MS4 stormwater discharge. But then we got feedback from this group saying that it would actually be nice to just create a new matrix specifically for stormwater to distinguish wastewater and stormwater effluents. And we thought that was a good idea. So there was also talk about the runoff matrix because that is sort of related to stormwater. But we decided, that will just remain its own runoff matrix as, that's sort of more like describing non-point source discharge or runoff. Effluent is going to remain as a matrix to keep describing the wastewater effluent. And then I got some questions from users in the interim time, and I just wanted to make it clear that the goal of this is to make it easier to basically remove stormwater effluent from water quality assessment because we don't look at that in integrated report. So for the integrated report, we are only supposed to be assessing ambient surface water, not effluents. So we are trying to sort of help distinguish the different things people are sampling and make it easier to, separate out the ones that should not be assessed for that process. So after many discussions and evolutions, this is where the current proposal stands. Just calling the matrix name stormwater. We had kind of batted around ideas of like MS4 effluent or NPDES stormwater or effluent. But the nice thing about stormwater is it also will be compatible with CEDEN 2.0, the system limits on character. And then it also just, I think, makes it it's pretty easy for people to understand. And I know some people may still get confused with runoff, but now hopefully with the descriptions, they can understand what the difference is so that the description is, effluent from point source discharges from MS4s, industrial facilities and construction sites regulated under NPDES permits. And then just to even clarify it more, we added water sampled prior to mixing with ambient surface water. Okay, Kelly, go ahead.
We sometimes sample dry weather runoff from stormwater drains. Is there a way to distinguish between wet and dry weather runoff because they can have different water quality objectives associated with them?
So yeah, and Abby just asked the same, or Abigail, sorry, just asked the same question in the chat. Yeah, we did hear from some folks that they would like a separate matrix for dry weather versus wet weather events, but kind of with our, we discussed it with a few people, and I think matrix is not the right field to distinguish wet weather versus dry weather events, because really anything that's both of those are actually still effluent from one of these systems, either MS4 or industrial or construction. So this still would fit for dry weather sampling. That's the one rub with the name of stormwater that I know that makes it a little hard, because it's like, well, there isn't actually a storm, but it is from one of these like stormwater systems or permitted sites. So that was my, one point of I wish it's not totally perfect, but I think, but I'm, yeah, if you have other ideas, I'm open to them. Lauren, go ahead.
Hi, sorry. Thank you, Tessa. I think that this makes sense to me. This is what we do a lot at Geosyn here, is working with stormwater. I'm sure, Tessa, you're already sick of my emails, but I think that this is great because under this MS4 permits and NIPD's permits, usually it's all referred to as stormwater. This makes sense. Is there a way to like add some guidance of just to tell folk to put dry weather versus wet weather in like a sample comment? Like, could there just be a comment in this matrix description, like if you put this as stormwater, optionally you could put it in X, like in the sample comment, or something in addition, just to help folk, because this is supposed to be really useful for all of us, especially folks who are data gathering and things like that, and for the water board. And this is a really important distinguishing factor of what we're looking at stormwater wise. So is that a possibility?
Yes, I'm trying to think exactly where we could put that and how we could sort of advertise it so people know to do that. Yeah, I mean, I think in like, there's like a sample comment field that would obviously be a great place to just write dry weather, wet weather. But getting people to all do that consistently is like another task.
Right.
So
maybe it's like a note. I don't know. So it's not just me.
Yeah. This is something that we are addressing in CEDEN 2.0. So like the field forms will have a button or a column of just like wet or dry weather event. So like you can just click the button, wet or dry, or put that in your column, because we do want that to be just something people can filter on when that's relevant. Oh yeah, so I could add some guidance in like the chemistry template guidance document of the sample comments of, like, you can add a comment of wet or dry weather event. I don't know. Does anyone else have ideas of how we could tell people that is a useful thing to do? I'm happy to just try to spread that word. Okay, Cajun first.
Yeah, good morning. This is a pretty important discussion. I do a lot of herbicide sampling and, water quality off, what would be headwater streams. So especially for the rulemaking and the integrated report, it's really important that it be recorded if this was wet or dry. And typically I use wet as a certain time frame. So, if it rained within a certain amount of time, because the streams will go up, you'll have different, things present in the stream. So I think this is really critical, because if you don't want to have storm, data that's collected for that integrated report during a storm system in headwater streams or for any type of parameter, I think you have to make that a requirement. Because if not, how will they know that when they're, when you guys are going to be querying what should be reviewed in the integrated report or not? And I hope I'm not misunderstanding the conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that's a helpful comment. And I'll kind of take that back to our integrated report team, because that is a good reminder that they often, I mean, I think the guidance, in the listing policy says like the data should be representative of the water body and not just representative of a particular storm event. That's not the exact language, but I'm paraphrasing. So I'm not sure what efforts they do right now to sort of remove actual storm event sampling data, besides like if someone uses the runoff matrix or effluent matrix, they would separate that out. So I'll ask them about that. And it may not be something we can sort of like require in the current system, but it is something we could potentially require someone, you have to either tell us if it's a storm or not, in CEDEN 2.0. So I'll bring this discussion to our, internal groups and see what we may want to pursue there.
Yeah, Abigail just brought up, and that's what I use, the 72 precipitation, because I have weather stations that I go off of in the individual watersheds. But this is very important from a regulatory, because, there may be others that are collecting data on a certain day, and they will put in that data for regulatory review in the integrated report. But if they don't mention that it was raining that day and I'm collecting data in the same watershed and it is raining, I think it creates a lot of extra work, but we got to make sure that the folks reviewing the data know it occurred during a storm system.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And then Kelly, did you have a comment?
I just had a thought, but I'm not sure if it would, if there's better ways of approaching it. But one idea would be to put in just in brackets or something in the matrix description, identifying where we should note wet or dry conditions, so that it's right up front and not just in the guidance document, but you would see it when you're looking at your lookup list. Note wet/dry weather conditions in column, and then wherever we want it to be, sample comments or collection comments, whatever it is.
Oh yeah, you're right. It could be collection comments. Okay, yeah, I will see how close we are to the character limit on this description, and I can see if that's a viable option. Okay. Any comments, besides maybe adding that note, any other comments or concerns on this description? I mean, now I'm also like, oh, I don't know how much else, what else we can fit in here, but it's like, it could say including dry weather effluent or something, to make that extra clear that it's not just during a storm, even though it's called stormwater. Okay, I'm gonna take this silence as we're getting really close, and this may be it or almost it. Okay. Well, appreciate the discussions we've had on this over the last several months, and I've gotten emails and other feedback from people, so I think it's been really helpful. Okay, glad we're almost. And then this I just put up as a reminder. We still have our runoff matrix. This I'm not changing. So this is sort of more that non-point source runoff, not in one of those, not in an MS4 facility or a different NPDES permitted storm water facility. Okay, so then I'm going to move on to blank water and lab water. So I'm making some proposals today, but this is just, I think the beginning of this discussion and not necessarily the end of it. But it has come to our attention over time that blank water and lab water sometimes, especially lab water, has sometimes been misused in the database. So one step we are wanting to make is to update the description of blank water to be a little more clear that it's really should be the matrix used for all or almost all QC samples. Obviously not ones where you're spiking a environmental sample, but and as well as toxicity testing like controls. So there had been a practice of using lab water as the matrix for tox test controls, but the reason that's not appropriate is the lab water definition currently is unprocessed laboratory tap water, which is not what people are using for their control tests. So we want to make it clear that blank water, should be any type of reagent water. We don't need to know, is it type 1 or type 2 reagent water, but any sort of it should be the appropriate purity for the test. And that includes toxicity tests, which wouldn't really be reagent water, but it's the appropriate purity prepared, in that way. It's sort of serving the same purpose in a tox test as it does in a chemistry test. So comments, concerns, thoughts on this? This is the first time I'm bringing this up with this group. So not expecting blanket acceptance from the start.
I don't see any troubles. I think we reached out to our lab and they were concerned about the lab water description too. So okay. I can throw this by our labs and make sure they're good with it. And personally, I don't see any troubles, but we'll reach out to the labs and get back.
Great. Okay. And I'm going to move to the next slide, but we're not totally done with this topic yet. So if you have another thought, there's time. So lab water, as I was mentioning, the current description is unprocessed laboratory tap water. And so just the name and the description don't really match. I think a lot of people, if they see the term lab water, would think, oh, that must be reagent water, like the kind you use, in a lab. And then we do have examples of this matrix sort of inadvertently being used incorrectly. So that's why I'm sort of targeting this one to make a change. And now, my initial thought was we're just getting rid of this. Nobody should ever be using tap water for any purpose. But then we, of course, recently got an example shared with us where it may be an acceptable use. So now the thought is, this is, again, a very first draft proposal. So I'm happy to hear feedback, but there are cases where people use tap water as field QC samples. And if they have tested that tap water prior for their target analytes, that actually can be acceptable as a use. Typically we would still always recommend to people from a QA standpoint, it's better to use reagent grade water, but I understand that, can be logistically challenging if you're not a lab yourself and you have to reach out and get reagent water from a lab, and that if your tap water is been tested and shown to be clean of those target analytes you're looking for, that could be an acceptable use. But if we're going to do that, then we just want the matrix name to match that description. So then we would just add a name of tap water to be really clear to people, like this, you're really sure this is what you're using. So we don't expect this to be used frequently, but I know I was working with Moss Landing in the last few days and weeks on a case where there's a project where they use this for their field QC, and they have done that for several years, and it seems to not be contaminated with what they're looking at. So any thoughts on this? And we could not think of any other uses, acceptable uses of tap water besides field QC. But if people have other examples, I'm interested to hear about those. Go ahead, Stacy.
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree. When you were back on the other slide, I was going to say, they really should just change it to tap water. So, and yeah, it was one of my data providers. They use it for their field QC samples. So, I like the change.
Okay. Any
That makes
other?
sense, Tessa. I
Yeah.
like how it's going to be real easy to look at it. Tap water. Okay, done.
Yeah. I know.
That'd be nice.
I was like, I like names that make sense. You just
Yeah,
need
yeah,
to
that'll be good.
know what it means. Okay. Well, I'll probably be working with Stacy on this since I know she's got some constituents that might need this. But otherwise, if I don't hear anything else, then we'll probably move forward this in the next couple weeks. Okay. Well, that was much easier than I was thinking. So great. Okay. Any other, if you have any other comments on vocabulary, matrix, anything, otherwise I'm going to move on to CEDEN 2.0, which is a different topic. Abigail.
Hey, I just really wanted to confirm quick. Is this all going to be like the matrix changes, like everything moving forward, or is there any concern about past data that's already in the database?
So in general, we as the database manager, we're not going to look back and make changes to past data. So like if there's lab water constituents and data associated with them, those will continue on. They will exist and be in the query tool that you can find. If a data provider themselves wants to change it, now that we have this more clear language, you or whoever could work with whichever RC or that you submitted your data through to make those changes. But I am not really trying to create a huge workload for all the RDCs. It's more just, it would be on a case-by-case basis if people wanted to change their past data.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, I don't want to bombard the RDCs either. I just was checking. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to put out there, we'll do anything if you pay, if you want us to do it and you pay us to do it. We don't care.
Yeah, that's true. I don't want to take business away. So.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. All right, then we will move on to our updates on CEDEN 2.0. So if you haven't been following along with us over the years, this is just a little overview. So the water boards is working with an external software vendor. They're called EarthSoft and they have an Equus platform that they use. I know many labs and others have used that platform before. We are customizing that platform to store and intake CEDEN data, and we're calling that new system CEDEN 2.0. So we are just in the very first phase where we're working on the chemistry data module. And then we're also hopefully not far behind working on field results and habitat. Our second phase is currently planned to be taxonomy data, but we really want to just get chemistry over the finish line before we really dig too deep into taxonomy. So our schedule, we have our water board's contracted laboratory has been testing the chemistry module this past few months. So that has been a big milestone. And then we are hoping to be testing API connections with the regional data centers in the very near future. We were hoping to be doing that already, but we weren't quite ready. And then in basically the first few months of 2026, we are hoping to dig deeper into the field forms and basically field and habitat data submission, because ideally we could release that at the same time, but it may be slightly after the chemistry release. Another big thing we're working on these next few months is kind of our outreach to let people know this, change is coming, and developing all the resources people will need and sharing those to make the change. And we're hoping to have public use available of the chemistry module in spring. I won't say what date that means, but we are really shooting for spring. So I mentioned we've had our contract lab testing the chemistry module, so we've gotten some feedback. It's definitely helped us refine some of the QC checks and make sure we're not giving too many warnings but the right amount, and that the error messages kind of make sense and are understandable. And then also just like based on all that, refining our guidance document of, basically the chemistry, submission document of how do you format and submit your data. So trying to make sure all of those line up. But it's definitely been useful to have people testing real data in the system instead of our mocked up data. And then our next big thing that we're working on is sort of developing all these documents and resources that people will need to make this transition. So we should have the data template and at least first draft or version 1 of that chemistry data submission guide to release in January. And then we're also planning several like quick guide documents of just how to you have to create a login for the system, just general how to navigate the site, how to submit vocabulary requests. So that process is going to be changing in the new system. And we want to have some documents as well as some videos to hopefully help people walk through the process. For some things, there's going to be vocabulary crosswalks. As much as possible, we're trying to make vocabulary match exactly between current CEDEN and new CEDEN, but in some cases that's not totally possible. So we'll want to share, if you called it sample water in CEDEN, existing CEDEN, in CEDEN 2.0, you're going to call it surface water. That's just one example of things that are changing in the new system, but we're not changing in the existing system. And then we're also going to update the CEDEN website and just have a whole redesign that we launched with CEDEN 2.0. And all these resources I'm mentioning will be on the website, hopefully easily accessible. And then we're working on our outreach plan. So obviously this group, the CEDEN user group, is a huge part of it. We want to make sure we're keeping you all in the loop and up to date. And then we've been meeting regularly with our regional data centers to work out transition plans. There's still quite a ways to go there, but we are, in communication and working on things with them. Another big community we're thinking about is the lab community, as they may be producing the EDDs for the new system, or at least providing them to clients who need to submit them. So we have reached out through ELAP to the technical advisory committee, and we're going to be on their agenda for their next meeting to give a little training session, or at least overview of the new system and the changes. And I would expect to start seeing a lot of emails going out in the first quarter. We're going to utilize all of our water board's email lists, not all of them, but the relevant ones, just to share the news of, we're going to launch, and there'll be training sessions and where to find the resources that you need to make this transition. So just sort of our immediate next steps is we really want to get our template out, chemistry template shared with this group and, posted so anyone can find it, as well as the submission guidance document. So you can start seeing what things are changing. And then I'm thinking our next user group meeting, I would like to spend some time going over that with this group of sort of highlighting the things in the template that have changed. There's a couple new fields that aren't in the existing template. There's some new business rules on how some things, particularly like QC, may be reported. So I'm thinking our next meeting in March, I'll spend time going over that with this group. And like I said, first quarter will be just trying to develop all those resources that we can share with folks and doing outreach activities, training sessions, and then also working on the field module. Okay, and I think, yeah, that's all I had. So now if you've got questions, comments on CEDEN 2.0, the floor is yours. Kelly, go ahead.
When will the transition happen where we stop submitting to the current and we start submitting to 2.0?
That's a good question. We don't have a solid date for that, but that is something I'm pressing my management for. Initially, I know we were kind of saying this term of like 6 months after public release, but we're getting a lot of pressure from our management to make that shorter. But I'm also hearing a lot of feedback from the community that it should be at least that long. So I'm hoping I can give you an actual date on that, or a more hard timeline for that the next time I talk to you. But that's the current state of things. But I would guess it will land around 6 months after public release. Okay, Abigail.
I was just wondering, for the new matrices, are those available now, or are those going to be rolled out with the 2.0?
So
like the
we will
stormwater.
Sure. We will add those soon. It probably, even if I add those today, it's got to go through our review process. So it's, like a 3-week process, but I think we're close. It sounded like maybe I'm only tweaking things to add a little more guidance. And so we may be able to complete that
in a meeting
and have those available like starting in January.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, see there's a question in the chat from Aaron. Will CEDEN 2.0 be replacing SWAMP data entry processes? Yes, they will. So I think what you mean is like SWAMP, our SWAMP RDC, we have our own data loading, entering into the shell. So for field data specifically, yes, as soon as we complete our field module in CEDEN 2.0, then we would be having SWAMP switch over to that, the CEDEN 2.0 process for field data, or like field collections. Did I answer that, Aaron? Or okay. Any other questions, comments? Kelly, go ahead.
What about for toxicity? Are there changes planned for that too?
So eventually, yeah, I guess I could have mentioned this. Eventually, all the data types that we handle in CEDEN will transition over to CEDEN 2.0, but it's going to take us several years to do that. Because we have to customize it we want it to fit, how we format our data as much as possible. So we have to do some customizing of their sort of standard Equus product. And I sort of think toxicity, from what I remember, is kind of our last data type that we might get to. So I think that's going to remain in the current system probably the longest. So I know it will be a little burdensome for people to be submitting your chemistry to CEDEN 2.0 and maybe your toxicity to existing CEDEN. And then, eventually things will be switching around and as we roll it out over the years. So I appreciate everyone's patience through this process. And I really hope that, CEDEN 2.0 is a good system that we all are happy with in the end. That's definitely our goal. Okay. So more minutes. I'm just going to share this. But if anyone comes up with another comment, we have time. So our next meeting is scheduled for March 19th, and we'll definitely go over CEDEN 2.0 resources and things like that. I'm not sure if we'll have other vocabulary updates or other things, but we'll share an agenda sometime before the meeting. And I think my action items are see if we can add even a little more detail and helpful things to that stormwater description. And then I think we'll be working on that tap water, lab water switch as well. And the update of blank water description. So hopefully those will all roll out in the system in early January.
Thanks, Tessa. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Everyone
Everybody
takes
have
a little time off at the end of the year and
yeah.
Tessa.
Yeah.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays, everybody.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.